So, look, right now, Odin, do you mind pulling up the next article with the 10-year Treasury from CNBC? So, this from CNBC, 10-year Treasury yield breaks above 4.9% for the first time since 2007.
Uh-oh.
Look at this. Back to that time range of 2007 to 2010. U.S. Treasury yields rose on Wednesday with the 10-year hitting a fresh multi-year high as investors digested the latest economic data and considered the outlook for the Federal Reserve interest rates. Okay, the 10-year Treasury yield gained around 6 basis points to 4.908%, rising above 4.9% for the first time since 2007. Meanwhile, the 2-year Treasury yield was around flat at 5.22%, near levels last seen in 2006. So still that inverted yield curve slightly, right? But remember what we talked about here. The 10-year Treasury, when this continues to go up, there's more uncertainty, right? Investors, I wanted to ask you, this must be so hard for investors and analysts to price in all of the issues that we're seeing right now.
They're not pricing it in. They're all on the sidelines.
Right.
Everybody's in the sidelines.
How can you even begin to predict the geopolitical concerns, right? All that instability, the weird housing data. It's earnings season, right? So all the companies out there right now are reporting earnings. We talked about it before the show. I don't know if you wanted to get into it, but Tesla dropping 9%. I think Morgan Stanley dropped a significant amount too, right? So there's clearly some instability there, a lot of uncertainty with what's going on. You also have Fed commentary. Are they going to raise? Are they not going to raise? How do you even begin to price all this in? So for the listeners that are listening, right, the 10-year Treasury, when these things start to go up or they start to go down, it's really telling you is how much uncertainty there is and how much risk is associated within that time frame, right?
And we've got another thing that we called. We called early on in the year a looming earnings recession. We specifically said earnings recessions on previous shows, and for those of you who are longtime listeners, you probably recall that. This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is exactly what we talked about. And these companies are now going to report shrinking profits. And we started with the banking sector. We started with the finance sector. Remember when the first part of the year, lenders, banks, they were laying people off. And apparently some of this is still happening. That being said, it's going to trigger when consumer spending does start to pull back, and we just got a hot print on consumer spending, so we know it hasn't pulled back fully, despite Brian Moynihan's weird-ass comments. He couldn't be more wrong every time.
Every time he's wrong.
Every time. It's like he's doing it on purpose.
He's late to the party every time.
Hey, Jerome, what do you want me to say? Okay, I got that.
I'll say in 3 months.
Yeah, can I get the ayahuasca, though? It's just so weird. But we knew this was going to happen, and when consumer discretionary spending pulls back, you're going to see further earnings recessions. And to answer your point, the capital markets, right? So people always talk about how banks aren't a necessary part of the system. And I find it hilarious because, and again, I'm a banker. There's a bias. This is not me being the devil. It's just that everybody's getting their money from banks in one way or another. You might think private equity firm or venture capital, but there's banks behind it. Okay. It's just the way this works. It's a long, convoluted story, but take it for what it is as just like a baseline assumption. All right. The entire capital markets, people who want to invest and buy and M&A activity, they're all on the sidelines and they're waiting for things to bottom out. Right now, there's not a lot going on unless you have a compelling reason to merge or to sell. Why would you right now? And why would you buy if you're a buyer? You would wait till somebody's less worth, right? There's an earnings recession coming. If consumer spending is pulling back, you're going to wait and see what happens.
Right.
Everybody's on pins and needles just kind of waiting in the markets. And yet you have some of these comments come out like, oh, if things are optimistic, things are rosy, blah, blah, blah. We had hoped that the Treasury were done rising below sub 5%. And yet here we are hitting effectively 5%, highest number since 2007. And it's compelling information, and yet you still have people like Brian Moynihan in the news with rosy comments,
right?
Going like, "Oh, the consumer is panicking," and it's like, dude, they're gonna panic a whole hell of a lot more if you think they're freaking out now.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know where this all goes, but I'll tell you, it concerns me greatly that two idiots like us and the smart guy behind the switcher in the back can predict so many of these things so far out that seasoned economists with their bias and everything else they had to know because they're smarter than us on some level, and they had to be manipulating the consumer. consumer.
Yeah.
They had to be. This had to be manipulation.